Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and welcome to my dream for the Division 3 Reimagined. I mentioned in my last video that I kind of wanted to revisit this subject in this video because I have done one of these in the past. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen it. It's the pinned video on the channel. It's got a ton of views. I know a lot of you guys are very invested and like to discuss and think about this topic. And so given that we're now 10 months out from when I first made that video, and we now know a lot more stuff, regarding the current landscape of the video game industry and some more story stuff regarding Division 2 and the franchise, I really want to remake this video with some new perspective and some new ideas that could pan out to give us a much more accurate idea of what we might see in a potential Division 3. I will say now that if you've not seen my previous video, I recommend you might want to go and watch that first because I kind of delve in and analyze some of the behind the scenes stuff that's been going on with the game that kind of really hints towards what we're going to get, content-wise in the future, and it kind of sets up what I want to deliver on with this video. That also being said, if you did not watch that and you're not going to watch it now, this video will contain full spoilers for the leaks that came out back at the TU10 PTS regarding both the plot lines and endings of Seasons 3 and 4 and some other stuff, so if you do not want to know those leaks, then I recommend you don't watch this video. But if you do want to know what those are, and I'm not encouraging it at all, I'm just saying it's information that's out there and I have made a video on it in the past. If you want to know what those are, I'll leave a link in the description and you can go find that for yourself before you watch this so it all makes sense. That being said though, let's get into this. There are two big new focuses that I want to, hone in on with this video as compared to my original dream for the Division 3 video. Those being possibilities with the next generation of consoles, because that's really something that I think has maybe flown under the radar a bit for why certain aspects of Division 2 turned out the way they did. And beyond that, I also want to include, obviously, the Season 4 ending and that leak and how that sets up the story, whereas I didn't have that information back in, December of last year. So those two things combined, I think, are really going to bring some new life into this topic, and so I'm very excited to get right into it. Let's start with next gen, because I think this is actually a very important aspect to consider when you're thinking about what a Division 3 might look like, because there are hints in the past and other stuff around that really gives us a glimpse at what these devs have wanted to do with the Division brand for a long time, but have maybe been limited by this game being on Xbox One and PS4, which are at this point 7-year-old consoles. So I think with next gen coming out in the next 2 months, that and, the continual PC upgrades, we could really see some interesting things for, a potential Division 3. But before I give my own thoughts, let's take a look at something I found rather intriguing. And that was a conversation on Twitter between Bruce, who, if you don't know, is a prominent game designer on the Division 2, and Like Butter, who is a, former Division YouTuber, if you were unaware. And they were talking about some Division 3 stuff as well as the overall, infrastructure of the game. So let's just read through this here. I'll have it on screen if you want to read along. Like Butter says, "Hey Bruce, hypothetically, how hard is it to make an actual open world in the Division like an MMO? Is there just too much detail in Division for that to ever be a possibility? I know people like their pictures and stuff, but just how hard is it to have good graphics and players?" And then Bruce responds saying, "I'm the furthest thing from an engine programmer or network engineer, but I think the technology is there. Anything is possible, but things like a seamless Dark Zone are more complicated due to Microsoft and Sony having rules about their multiplayer network, subscription service paywalls." And I think that's actually a really good point that a lot of us might not have considered in the past, is how they have to work around these different types of problems that we might not pick up on as the average consumer. Stuff like Xbox Live and PSN, that's just kind of, for a lot of us, it's like a no-brainer. Yeah, we just subscribe to it every year. But for people who don't have it, what might the game look like if you didn't have that? Can they just build it knowing that you're going to have it? Like, there's a lot of stuff in there that I think we don't always consider. So it's definitely a very interesting perspective. But let's move on here. Like Butter then says, "See, this is the stuff we don't think about. I appreciate it, man. I just dream of an MMO, but in the Division universe." Bruce then comes back and says, "The original design for the Division had seamless co-op/PvP at its core, where encounters with other players happen dynamically as you explored the world. But to sell the game across multiple platforms, you have to play by the hardware manufacturer's rules, unfortunately." And I think that mention of the original vision for the Division, I think that's a very interesting thing, and we'll come back to that in just a second. But to finish it out, Like Butter says, "Is there no way around that? I think that's what everyone expected when it first got announced." And Bruce says, "At the time, no, but the industry has evolved. 5 years ago, things like cross-platform multiplayer were unheard of. Now it's becoming more and more common, if not expected. I think the future is bright for gamers whether you're on PC or console. Next gen is going to be great." Now, is that little mention at the end there some sort of hint that that original vision for the game might be coming to Division 3 with the new landscape of agreements between Microsoft and Sony and the new consoles and all that? I don't know. But regardless, I think that if there is a Division 3, which I'm pretty sure there is at this point, I think one of their big pushes and focuses will be on expanding the possibilities of the open world. Because really, it's kind of a territory that hasn't been encroached upon much by other titles in the same genre. Obviously, real traditional MMOs like WoW or some of the upcoming ones, like I think New World is one that's coming out. A lot of those, obviously their whole focus is open world because it's an MMO. You have hundreds and thousands of players in a world at the same time. But as far as a console-based, looter shooter genre type deal, Destiny has its open world areas. It has, the patrol zones, but I don't think it really does much of a job making it feel a lot like an MMO, at least to me at least. You can see other players there that aren't in your group, but it's not really like the Division where it's all, you can run from one end of a city to the other and encounter all these types of different dynamic events that are different every time you go through. I think it's something that Division definitely has a unique take on, and it could really drive home and push forward given these new technology, boundaries being pushed with the next gen. Because like I said, I think Division 2 has a great open world, like with all those events and all that stuff. And Division 1 had, artistically it had a great one. It didn't have really any events going on in it. It felt like a pretty lifeless world. But Division 2 really remedied that by bringing in control points, which I think are fantastic, and all the different events that are tied to that. But at the same time, it kind of lacks that magic MMO touch when you don't see other people out in the other world unless they're in your group. And some of that seamlessness. Like Division 1 had some really nice seamlessness between the open world and the dark zone, like when you could hop over the gates instead of going through the checkpoints, or if you went through the checkpoints and there wasn't a loading screen. I know the reason why there is now in Div 2 is so that it can, match you to a more populated server, which doesn't work half the time. But it was just there was some magic to it, right? When you're out in the world, you can just go straight into the dark zone and you see people in there. Like you could even, I remember next to the checkpoints, there were always those gates that like it was large enough for vehicles to go through. And if you stood on one end of that, you could even see people in the dark zone there. If they were like fighting right next to the checkpoint, you could see them through the thing. And it was pretty cool because it, it just gave you that sense of I'm really in this world that's being shared by other people and I don't have to go through loading screens or instances to find other people. It was just a really cool feeling. And so I think that if Division 3 is coming, they're really going to want to drive that home with these new possibilities. So the question becomes, what shape could those, new possibilities take form in? And I think there's really a lot of different avenues they could go down. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what they're thinking and what they're going to do, but I definitely think that there are some ideas that both the community has thrown out as well as the devs have hinted out that could really take shape and become our reality for Division 3 and maybe the future precedent of this genre. And to start there, let's circle back to something I mentioned earlier with hints in the past of what we could see coming in Division 3. If you go back, and this will be playing in the background, I believe, if you go back and look at that very original Division 1 trailer, like Bruce was mentioning in his tweet, that original vision that they had for this game was that the open world was expansive. There were multiple dark zones that were larger than the ones in Division 2, and you could find players even if you weren't in the dark zone. Just if you were in the open world, you could come across other players like a traditional MMO and take on different activities with them. I think that is 100% something we are going to see in Division 3. I think the open world, imagine if you're just running around in DC and you're at a control point, all of a sudden 2 other players run in and they're all of a sudden helping you clear this control point. That is exactly what I think we're going to see, some form of that, whether or not the actual open world evolves itself, but I just think open world cooperation and exploration is going to be a big focus, and having other players around there is just going to make it seem all that more connected and fun to engage with. And it gives it that sense of seamlessness if you can go from doing that straight into like PvP, kind of like what Bruce is mentioning and what you can see in that original Division 1 2013 E3 trailer when they're just, I know they're in the dark zone, but they're extracting and it goes into this very complex kind of PvP battle. That's what I think we can definitely expect to see. So that's all factual. That's stuff that we know, and I think that is realistic to expect for a next Division entry. Now, I want to get into one of my own ideas, because this is my dream for the Division 3, what I would want to see. I think they could do something really cool with the open world, and that is, hear me out here, hear me out, don't freak out. The entire map is the Dark Zone, but it could also be a PvE Dark Zone. I am one of the biggest supporters for there not being a PvE Dark Zone ever. You can debate me on it all day long. I don't want there to be one, but I think if they did it this way, it would actually work out very well, and it could make for a really compelling open world that would serve as replayable content, that they wouldn't have to create, tens of dozens of game modes to satisfy people's replayability needs. If they can bake it into the open world with this next-gen capability, the game could have some insane sustainability for, lifelong content, and it would just be awesome. Let me get into it. Part of what the community has, suggested for PvP for a long time is faction-based PvP content. You have the rogues and you have the SHD. You can choose which side you're on. I mentioned in my previous video that it would be very cool if Division 3 would allow you to pick a side when you start the game, whether you want to stay SHD or you want to stay rogue. And we'll get to the story implications of this later, but just imagine that possibility. There could be different campaigns, there could be whatever. But as far as the open world is concerned, if it was all one dark zone, and remember it can go PvE, but if it was all one dark zone, then you would have two different factions fighting in the dark zone. There would be no more like flagging rogue, and then it's you against everyone else, which if you know me, you know my favorite part of this game, of this franchise, is to go rogue in a 4-man group and hold out against as many people as possible. In Division 1, that was 20, and Div 2 would only be 8. But that feeling of going rogue and giving it your all against everyone else and seeing how long you can survive, that's what I love about this game the most. That's the reason why I kept playing Division 1. So I'm the one here suggesting that goes away in place of this new open world system. So what would this offer? If you had two factions, if you had the SHD and the rogues, let's say on opposite ends of this map, whatever the new city is, and let me say this now, I would want it to be either in the fall or the winter. Before I was saying strictly winter, but I think they could also make some really cool stuff with the fall, because if you look at what Div 2 is, it's in the summer, right? But you have these really cool like thunderstorms and rainstorms, which I know can happen in the summer, but they kind of stretch the boundaries with what the season, really brings. And so I think if they did the fall, they could have some really cool stuff with like nature, all the leaves on the ground. They could have rainstorms, and they could even have some like light snow showers. It could be really cool. One other thing that I think they really need to focus on for kind of the aesthetic of the game is bringing back that grittiness from Division 1. I can't remember who it is now, but one of the Division YouTubers was really making a point that part of the reason why Division 2 doesn't feel quite as special in that sense as Division 1, or maybe even nostalgic, is that they kind of skip out on that grittiness of a pandemic and an apocalypse, right? In Division 1, you had body bags everywhere, you had these fires going on, you had blood on the streets. Division 2 just feels kind of like soft. You go out in the open world and there are all these like, hardcore dudes walking around with guns, but there's no bodies, there's no blood, there's like not a lot of, apocalyptic type stuff. And I know it's 7 months in the future from when the virus broke out, but at the same time, there's certain like corners of the Dark Zone you can find these really like gritty scenes at with, But in Division 1, the Dark Zone only intensified that. There was also that stuff in the open world, and I think that's somewhat missing from Division 2. So I think if they do a Division 3, they need to make it the fall or the winter, because that's just Division's, bread and butter. That'll make it a great sell already. But then really bring back that grittiness to the open world that makes you feel like you're in the Division universe. I think that's very needed. But back to the topic of the open world and its mechanics. So you have these two factions. You have the SHD and the Rogues, and the player themselves can choose which side they want to go on. So that means then you have two base of operations, right? Across this city, let's say on opposite ends, you have the base of operations for the SHD agents and then the Rogue agents on the opposite end. So if the entire map is the Dark Zone, then that means you can PvP in it. The entire map could be used for PvP, and you could have these servers of 25, 50 people on each side, so you could actually have these like faction wars. How awesome would that be? You could bring in some Div 2 inspiration with settlements and have some settlements spread out throughout the map that you could take control of, that the different factions could control. So let's say the Rogues have 2 of them that are close to theirs, and then the SHD are pressing the advantage a bit, and they hold 3 of them that maybe are encroaching upon the Rogues' territory. Then the players themselves can choose whether they want to go do some landmarks, some PvE content, or they can go and attack the settlement and try and gain some benefit for their faction. Maybe having the settlements gives you some types of settle buffs, or there are certain vendors you can access, or recalibration. Another thing I would really like to see, and some people might not agree with me, I would love it if they highly restricted how much fast traveling you can do. Part of the draw of an open world, especially in like MMOs, is that the limiting the amount that players can just zoom around the map really makes the world feel a lot bigger and more, I want to say deadly, but just more traversable, more fun to explore and go around. I think if this, faction idea were to take place and you had 2 base of operations, I would say don't allow fast traveling unless your faction holds some of these settlements around the map. That way you could fast travel to these points, so there would be incentives to capture them so that you have, more access points around the map and more places to reinforce your troops if you're attacking the other faction. Just thinking about this makes me so excited. Like, I know I'm saying sacrifice the whole rogue experience currently in the Dark Zone from Division 1 and 2, but in place of that, you could have these like 50v50 battles. Maybe you could push all the way to someone's base of operations, right? Maybe there's some reward for capturing the other faction's base of operations. Imagine 30 of you outside the gates of this compound. There's like fortifications, there's turrets and pulse scanners inside. The people inside are trying to defend, shooting down on you from the walls, and you're just using your skills and everything to try and break the front gate open. How epic would that be? I think that's exactly what Likebutter is alluding to with a more MMO style take on the Division, as well as what Bruce is saying is possible now with next gen and these other things, which is why exactly I think this is the type of stuff we could see them push with the open world in Division 3. But beyond the potential for, faction-based PvP, which would be awesome, let me talk about what the rest of the open world would offer, so that there's, obviously some PvE content as well. I think when you're in your base of operations, you can choose whether you want to be in a PvP server, which obviously allows these faction wars, or a PvE server, which eliminates the other players from the equation but still allows you to find friendlies in the open world, but to an extent. For a way to keep it balanced, I think they could take inspiration from Division 2 with the world difficulty setting. So if you want to play normal difficulty, you can, but that way you can only find up to 4 players in the open world. So you can either have one full team of your own, or you can find 4 other solos or whatever mix up of that in the open world, so that you can't just go and steamroll through all the content because there's 4 of you. I mean, you'll still do pretty well normal, but the loot would be less, right? So let's say then you want to take it up to hard. Well, then maybe you could find 8 players in the open world, challenging 12, heroic 16, and legendary 20. That's right, you could have a legendary open world setting. I think this is exactly what a lot of PvE players have wanted for a long time, because it'll just give them that replayability factor with the hardest and most difficult content in the game. So what kind of stuff could we see in the open world? Well, I think that extractions should be something that's present in both the Dark Zone and the, PvE option, the Light Zone. And that if you choose to go PvE, maybe at your extractions when you're trying to get your loot out, and they could increase the bag size, of course, to like 20 or something just to make it a bit more fun. When you're trying to extract in the PvE world, you could get attacked by these, AI agents, whether they're rogue or SHD, depending on what faction you're on. That way, it emulates the same thing they're trying to achieve with the PvP Dark Zone with the faction-based stuff, but you're not fighting actual players if you just want that PvE experience. That could be really cool. You go around and do landmarks. Maybe if you're in the PvE one, landmarks are called control points and they function a little bit differently to emulate that same stuff from Division 2. There are some more other activities you can find. There's, random convoys and open world bosses. There's so many possibilities from this next gen, technology that could really let them push the limits. And I think that if they embrace what has made Division great in the past with their open world, aspirations and the Dark Zone, and meld that all into one experience that'll satisfy both PvP and PvE players, they just have a recipe for success. So overall, that is my vision for the gameplay in the open world of Division 3. Would be something with faction-based content, PvP or PvE, that encompasses all types of players. And that way, you're set for success from the start in terms of replayability. They can make the open world the main draw. Obviously, they have a campaign, and they can put in modes like survival, like other stuff. But I think if you nail the open world from the get-go and make it somewhere that players want to play in and keep going in and getting loot and making more builds, then that way the game sets itself up to keep perpetuating these awesome events and content that players want to engage with. And so as to not corrupt that later on, I think they could definitely do what they've done in Division 2 and make all the post-launch content instant. So you have a helicopter at your base of operations and you can travel to whether they add raids or incursions or new missions or whatever. And that way you keep the open world one clear vision as it's been from the start and keep that one almost its own mode, right? And that creates that seamlessness that people want back so much. Alright, so that is more of the gameplay and the mechanical aspect to this, topic. What I think Division 3 could aspire for, because I think they're definitely going to push the open world as far as they can take it. The other aspect to it, however, is story, because I think there is a lot of stuff they're setting up that Division 3 can pick and choose what it wants to elaborate on, right? And again, like I mentioned in my last video, this is assuming that Division 3 is the first narrative content after the ending of Season 4. Like, if we get an expansion 2 for the Division 2, then obviously some of the story will probably be taken up and resolved, so let's just assume there's not going to be another expansion in that Division 3 after that Season 4 ending, Faye killing the president and blaming the Division, kind of forcing us to be rogue. That's the premise for the Division 3. And maybe this wouldn't totally coincide with my, gameplay vision of the two factions and that whole open world. Maybe this doesn't fit with that exactly. Again, that was more my own thoughts than what I think might actually be coming. But I think a big player in the narrative that maybe hasn't fully been realized by everyone yet is the Black Tusk, because I think they have a overarching plan that has not been fully revealed to us yet. And I'll just preface this now, I'm not a lore guy, okay? I'm not in the know with every little detail, so maybe some of the stuff isn't actually true or doesn't apply, but overall I get a good sense of what the story is. And so I think the Black Tusk have a part to play that they haven't fully committed yet. Because as far as I understand, the BTSU is the main faction of the Black Tusk that we've been fighting this entire time. The BTSU, the Black Tusk Special Unit. But as far as I understand, that's just one sect, right? There's a larger Black Tusk corporation that's backing all of this movement that they've done. Because if you listen to some of the stuff that Schaefer says in the audio logs for missions or the comms, then you'll know that he's not the top dog. There's someone above him that controls both what the BTSU are doing as well as what these other sections of the Black Tusk are doing. And I think we're going to start getting hints of this in Season 3 when Barton Schaefer is the primary, target for the manhunt. And part of this is going to involve the Sokolovs. Now again, if you watched my video detailing the leaks, the Sokolovs are a family that are going to get introduced in Season 3 with, I believe, Natalia and Felix are the siblings. And so obviously you know the name Sokolov because it's a brand set, it's the SMG one. And so I think that they're going to set these guys up as another very powerful faction within the Division universe that has a lot of control behind the scenes that we don't know a lot about yet. But I think we're going to come Division 3. But I know they had some dealings with Candle trying to work on the cure to the virus. So they definitely have their foot in the door in a lot of different situations. They are trying to control the Division agents because they are their biggest threat. They're lawfully able to act unlawful. They can do whatever they want, and they take direct orders from the president, which is the whole reason why the Black Tusk set up killing the president to blackmail the Division and force them into this, fake betrayal and making the country think that the Division are the enemy, when really they're not. So the basis for the story of Division 3 that I think could be really cool is we see the Black Tusk kind of succeed with their goal of control. Maybe they take control of a certain city, this is where the game would take place, and they have kind of the governmental authority. They patrol the streets, they police a lot of things. Something that I think Division 3 really needs to expand upon is the sense of what the status of the world is. Because in Division 1, right, we know that that's only a few weeks after the virus broke out. We know that there's wars going on in the streets for people trying to control things. We see the civilians running around asking for food. Like, it's very clear what the state of the world is there. For Division 2, though, I think it gets a bit muddied because we have an idea that these settlements, obviously the theater and the castle, are very well set off. They have a lot of supplies and sustainable, food and all that kind of stuff. But when you walk around on the street, it's like a war zone, and that's not kind of the sense you get from some of the books or some of that other stuff. And then there's also not a lot of, civilians out on the streets other than the patrols you see. I just feel there's not as clear of a vision for the overall world in Division 2 as there was in Division 1. But what I would really like to see Division 3 do is do a bit of a time skip. Maybe we go 3 years into our Div 2 characters having to be on the run because they've been flagged as rogue involuntarily, and we land in this city controlled by the Black Tusk where they're now trying to reestablish society. They're trying to rebuild something while being the authoritarian figures. Like, can you imagine the whole larger of the Black Tusk infantry just coming in the city? You have those drones patrolling the skies. You have robo-dogs and the units, patrolling the streets. That could be really cool. And having the Division trying to blend in and survive within the limits of this city could be really awesome. Now, I don't know if that necessarily would also leave room for the Rogue versus SHD thing that they're definitely setting up, but it definitely could. They could do all three of those things in one city, have the Black Tusk control it, and have the Division in an underground network that is also trying to take down the Rogues in some fashion. I don't entirely know. Again, I'm not a story person, but I think the threads of the Black Tusk's larger motivations as well as what the Rogues are planning are definitely all things that they could tackle in Division 3 to make it a very compelling and rich story game to, satisfy that side of the player base and the people that want that. And that could also make the basis for some awesome gameplay like I was mentioning with the faction stuff. So I'll leave you on this pitch. We have the ending of Season 4 where Faye kills the president and our characters from Division 2 are now cast out. They've betrayed the country supposedly and they are flagged as rogue. Skip, 3 years into the future. They're trying to survive. They're trying to blend in, survive on an underground network. They arrive in the city that the Black Tusk have taken control of. They control the cure to the green poison. They control, the majority of the Division agents because there's no more president to take orders from. And so the campaign revolves around you trying to sabotage and overthrow the Black Tusk and the Sokolov's control of this city. And at the same time, you dealing with the morality and the conflict between the SHD and the Rogues. And maybe the ending of the campaign culminates in you choosing a faction, whether you want to be SHD, you want to return to the side of the Division, or you want to stay a Rogues. Maybe you side more with their ideologies. And then that could be the basis for the Faction Wars endgame. The whole open world is a dark zone. You can take place in these 50v50 battles, or you can stay in PvE and take part in dynamic events, or get flagged and ambushed by these, AI agents or rogue agents, whichever one. It could be awesome. That's my pitch and my reimagined dream for the Division 3. Alright guys, well I think that wraps up the majority of the big points that I wanted to hit with this video. I'm sorry this one was so much longer than the other one, but now that we have a clear picture of where things are headed in the future and we kind of know some of the stuff with the next gen and the story, there's a lot more I wanted to cover. I could really go on for days about what I would love to see in Division 3, but the real question is, what do you guys think? What do you think we'll see in Division 3? What do you want to see? And do you think any of my stuff could really come true, or is it too optimistic? Let me know down below. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you can be updated every time I upload. The future of this franchise is bright, guys, so I hope you'll stick around and see it with me. Have a great day, and until the next one, guys, RogueGold. Out.